Tony Paz with CoosaValleyNews.com. We're sitting here with Floyd County School Superintendent Dr. Jeff McDaniel. Still a very widely discussed topic in Floyd County schools, getting some statewide attention with certain boards and folks. Dr. McDaniel, welcome to Coosa Valley News.
Thank you, Tony. Pleasure to be here, and pleasure to sit down with you today. Like the early morning, got my coffee, and certainly appreciate it.
Okay, tell me about the RIF procedure and exactly, it was a three-phase process. Tell me about that three-phase process.
That's correct. The RIF plan was board approved by our board. The RIF it does involve three tiers or three processes to that. It starts out with evaluation. And we look at personnel, we look at evaluation, and we've kind of seen how performance has gone over the past time. We've looked at that a little bit. Once you kind of move through that performance phase in step one in evaluation and step two, then everybody was placed in three different categories, whether you were a tenured, a non-tenured, or a classified individual, and then criteria from there develop the RIF plan and criteria.
Can you tell me at what process did the local school governance team come into play with this procedure?
We have gotten with our local school governance teams. We have discussed with them that the RIF probably a week or so ago, we've had area meetings. We've talked about some changes we're making in curriculum as well. We've looked at our block and period day in high school and talked to them. We opened the door up to discuss the RIF and ask some questions, and we got some good questions from our folks, regarding the RIF.
Did they have any say-so over the procedure, or was
We had certainly had conversations with the state regarding criteria and how that it goes about, especially when you're doing something at a system level that involves the Board of Education, that involves a very complicated RIF plan, that involves making some very hard and tough decisions. And we certainly worked with the State Department on that.
Obviously, by now some of the names have come out, not from you guys, but from the teachers themselves. 2 Teachers of the Year in Floyd County were part of the RIF procedure. Care to explain?
We had 119 very difficult decisions. Very difficult decisions. As these people went through the RIF plan and went through the criteria, it was very unfortunate that when it all washed out, Tony, there were 119 folks that certainly was not going to have employment for the 014 year. Very heavy, very tough, very hard decisions.
One of the questions we were asked, both of these teachers were about to become tenured teachers next year. While some teachers that were 2 years away from tenure did not get RIFed. Did upcoming tenure come into play with any of the RIF employees?
Not at all. Not at all. We looked at the RIF plan. They went into their buckets. There were set criteria there, and we followed the guidelines of that RIF plan and the criteria that was set in each of those buckets to let those decisions be made through the approved RIF plan by the Board of Education.
When teachers had same criteria, say 2 first-year teachers, same education, one person gets RIFed, one person does not. How did that come into play?
We were able, through the established criteria, to make good, sound decisions based off the RIF plan. So there was no personal or no judgment calls by any one person. It wasn't personal. It wasn't personal at all. It was very tough and very heavy, and it still looms with me. Somebody asked me what's going to be the hardest thing for the 014 school year, Tony, and obviously it's going to be watching 119 fewer people walk through our doors.
But what was the criteria for the same employees with the same criteria, with the same background, both same year?
Right.
Was it just
certainly
you just happened to be the one kind of thing?
Absolutely not. Certainly the criteria to make those decisions were sound in every decision we made. There was no having to draw a straw or make a decision that strayed away from the RIF plan. Didn't occur. So through that criteria, the decisions were made.
Okay. Do you think, like you said, 119 less people walking through the doors, how do you think this will benefit, again, 2 Teachers of the Year, how do you think, when parents look at this, how do you think this will benefit the students next year in a positive way?
Yeah, very tough decision. Very tough decision. Decisions that the majority of counties have already made across the state. Cobb County is facing a $79 million budget deficit for 2014. Bibb County just announced a massive layoff down there. From what I've heard, Cherokee County is looking at taking furlough days or reduced work days at levels that are kind of unprecedented. So I think when you kind of look at that process and look at those things, it's always difficult when you watch anybody walk out your door. 119, I want to kind of relate that to class size. We sat in Floyd County currently at about a 1 to 12 ratio in class size. We are looking at about a 1 to 15 ratio now. Is it going to be increased class sizes? You may see a few students more in a classroom, but more at the high school level, maybe a little bit at the middle school level. But we're still going to be coming in right on line with our class sizes, in line with state expectations. There's a lot of flexibility there too, Tony. But we're not going to see classrooms of 30 kids in first grades. But we didn't close any schools, we didn't lose any programs, and we didn't lose any services in this as well. So, and that's a benefit to all of our children.
I'm glad you mentioned Cobb County. There have been schools across the state that have implemented RIF programs based on projected budgets, and then budgets seem to come, money seems to come in that they didn't know they would have, and some of the employees were hired back. Has that crossed the Floyd County's mind, and is that something that's possible for some of these teachers to actually still be employed next year, even though they've gotten RIF?
We do anticipate that there may be some openings. We may have teachers who retire. We may have teachers relocate. We may have spouses that relocate, that draw that teacher or that parapro out of the class and out of the building and away from Floyd County. Certainly, as we look at the rehiring process, we have set up an email specifically for our RIF people that they're going to know about all the openings, have an opportunity to reapply.
Some parents have talked about possibly moving their kids to private schools or the city system. Did that thought ever cross your mind? And in your opinion, what would keep parents from doing so?
We're going to continue the great things in education that we've been continuing in Floyd County. And certainly the decisions that parents make, I'm a parent myself. I've got a senior sitting at Pepperell High School right now. I had a daughter just graduated. So I get it on the parental side of that. And, you know, parents are always supportive of the decisions parents make for those children and their children. And if it's decisions that take them out of Floyd County, I would really encourage them to hang in there, and that they're going to see and continue to see the great things we've always done, Tony.
Next question I have for you that people have asked, and I'm sure they're curious about, is this the last RIF, or is this something that teachers and faculty could see again?
It's a great question, Tony, and I appreciate that. And it's one that I do like to answer. Certainly a lot of our revenue is dependent upon legislation in the government and local taxation, and that's how public education is funded. When you continue to see these revenue cuts, it puts us in a position that we have to make some very tough decisions. We don't foresee additional rifting for the 2014 school year. How will that look in 2015? We certainly hope the legislation reaches a level to plateau that money out a little bit. If we continue to see these revenue drops and we can't keep our expenditures up to the revenue that's coming in, the board has an obligation to assure that fiscally sound budget. Will that lead to further conversations about a RIF? Possibly so. Possibly so. It depends on how that revenue flow is going to look for the 2015 and 16 years. But we're always watching the radar for this revenue to see if we can get an insight to how 15, 16, or 17 may look.
You know, a question that you know you may not. This is completely speculatory. Obviously, State Superintendent John Barge is a Floyd County folk.
Yes.
A little bit of controversy in Atlanta. You mentioned Atlanta and revenue in Atlanta with Dr. Barge and the charter system that was approved this past year. Do you think that's going to have any effect on funding for the public education system?
Wow, Tony, I tell you what, you do ask the questions, and certainly I know my position, I know my level, I know my pay grade, okay? So I'm going to kind of leave that to Atlanta and the legislation to figure that one out, okay? But a great question.
Well, Dr. McDaniel, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate the interview. Check back. You've been watching CoosaValleyNews.com.